Do people never learn? Once more, the task of solving problems, worrying, weird and wonderful falls to you. So call in with your suggestions live as we look to turn a trial into a triumph.
Live from York, this is the Late Late Show with Christopher Vowles on Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live on the Podbean app or desktop player. Just head over to www.podbean.com/LSW/TT Radio or search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TT Radio.
Good evening and welcome to another edition of the Late Late Show with me, Christopher Vowles. You find me this week making the most of the half-term holiday in a sun-drenched North Yorkshire. The sun's only just gone down, the lamps are lit on the street, and the birds are just settling down for the night. After spending much of the last half-term moderating GCSE tags work, I'm consciously attempting to switch off for the week, although there's still work to do. The complex human jigsaw puzzle that is the English department timetable needs to be finalised. Schemes of work need updating, and there's reading to be done as we prepare to deliver an intro to university series of lectures and seminars when we return from the holiday. I'm doing something on Freud's theory of the uncanny, which I've not read for a while, so I've got a bit of reading to do there. At some stage, I'll also give some thought as to how a 24-hour boarding school might make best use of the extra 30 minutes a day we're being promised without completely remodeling the entire Western calendar. But that's for another day, I think. This half-term holiday is all about revising my Protestant rest ethic. But in tonight's show, we're revisiting crisis management scenarios. This is our third in the series, and I'm hoping it will be an ongoing series on about a monthly basis throughout the run of the show. For new listeners, the basic premise of the show is that you've been left in sole charge of our 11 to 18 school for the day, and inevitably, when things go wrong, everyone is looking to you for solutions. So I will present you with 5 crisis scenarios, and you can text or call in live with your solutions, queries, questions, advice, or howls of frustration if you like. I will then shape the future scenario shows around whatever responses I have from people over the course of the evening. We will cover guiding principles of catastrophe in schools, think about prioritizing resources and responses, and perhaps explore some of those areas that might reveal what really matters to you. So I'm particularly interested in where your priorities lie tonight. So please do call in and help us solve a whole new set of crises. After our recent shows, I've seen leaders presented with the challenge of managing wild badgers on the school grounds. I don't know if that's something that you've picked up over the last few days on Twitter. And my own school has actually suffered a power cut, which has taken down all of the telephone lines for pretty much the whole of today. Fortunately, we're all on holiday and not sitting at our classroom desks trying to plan work for the coming half term. So without further ado then, I'm going to introduce you to the first series of scenarios, and we're going to look at 3 scenarios in the first half of the show, and then we're going to move on to 4 more, if we have time, in the second half of the show after the news. Some people have asked me if the wooden horse that appeared in a previous episode might be reprised. So the horse will perhaps take some part in today's show in a slightly different form, but certainly you can keep your ears open for the return of the wooden horse in some shape or form tonight. But the first 3 scenarios are fairly straightforward ones, I think. The first one is an academic one. So The scenario is this. You have received an email from 20 disappointed Year 11 students who would like to study ancient history at A level, but can't because the subject was discontinued last year following the departure of the teacher who had designed and run the course. Re-establishing the course would be uneconomical this year. The school down the road does still offer the subject at A level. So that's our first scenario that we're going to be thinking about this evening. So if you have any thoughts on that one, please do call in. How do we respond to these Year 11 students who are clearly disappointed by the prospect of not being able to pursue their interest in ancient history in Year 12? Second scenario is one that comes up from time to time. Contractors on site are always quite difficult to manage. They are potentially staff, but not in the way that we usually think of staff. So the second one relates to contractors. The head of PE comes to inform you that the decorators who are repainting the entrance hall have propped open the code-locked fire doors for the third time this week and left the building to get more paint. Their paint trips typically take over an hour. So there's a couple of issues perhaps raised by that second one. So managing contractors on site is perhaps something we might look at in the first half of the show. And then the third one is another academic issue. The head of sociology is unhappy because students keep telling him that they can't do his homework because it clashes with homework set by the psychology department. The homework timetable for tonight is sociology. The head of psychology has previously made clear his view that students don't do enough wider reading these days. So the third problem there is potentially a head-to-head between the psychology and the sociology departments. Now, these three scenarios are perhaps fairly standard, and we'll move on to some of the stranger scenarios in the second half of the show. But if you're left in sole charge of the school, you could be presented with any one of these scenarios on any particular day. They seem to bring together all of the elements that might cause somebody to knock on your door and seek answers, often quite quick answers, often answers sooner than you're able to give them. So if you can send in your thoughts either by texting us or by calling the show, we would be delighted to hear from you. I'd like to bring in as many callers as I can tonight to help me solve these problems. A couple of messages already coming in from listeners. Roger's History says the wooden horse. I think he's perhaps anticipating a wild ride in the second half of the show. We've got a couple of listeners saying they've had similar conundrums to deal with this year in real life. And somebody else asking me what I'm going to do about these scenarios. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the news, give people a chance to think over those scenarios, if I just recap them. First one is academic. So we've got disappointed Year 11 students who can't study ancient history next year because the timetable doesn't allow it. We've got contractors leaving fire doors open for a significant period of time and then leaving site. And then we've got the academic issue of two departments going head to head over homework time. But I think there's possibly a crisis brewing at the Department of Education at the moment. So we'll go over live now to our news summary.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News with Megan Goods.
This is your latest Teachers Talk Radio News. New research from the London School of Economics has shown that children born in the summer are being mislabeled as having special educational needs by their primary schools. Using census records for over 6 million children who were in state primary schools over the years 2008 to 2018, Dr. Tammy Campbell found that among children reaching Year 6 in 2018, 16% of autumn-born girls had been attributed SEND support at some point during primary school, compared to 26% of summer-born girls. Similarly, 28% of autumn-born boys were given support, compared to 40% of those born in the summer. Dr. Campbell stated that the study shows how rigid prescriptive expectations not suitable for relatively younger children result in many of these children being denoted with SEND. And then the system that has created these needs cannot or will not meet them. This is because inherently, by the same conditions through which it creates some SEND, it is configured not to serve the children it attributes. It is configured instead to denote children as sufficient, good, meeting standards, expected level, or deficient, not good, not meeting standards, not at the expected level. This, the evidence begins to suggest, may contribute to increasing numbers of children being forced from the mainstream system. Teachers and schools are spending increasing portions of time serving the needs of the centralized assessment and accountability system, delineating children according to its dictates, rather than working with individuals to ensure learning, progress, and inclusion. Teaching unions have criticised the government's plan to extend the school day, saying it could do more harm than good. The plan has been drawn up by Sir Kevin Collins, the government's Education Recovery Commissioner, and proposes a minimum 35-hour week and 100 hours of additional schooling. However, opposition from the Treasury could see the plan receive 10 times less funding than originally proposed, meaning the implementation of the proposal could fall short. Education spokespeople have been critical of the plan so far, with concerns over the impact on staff well-being and students feeling they are being punished for circumstances beyond their control. Criticism also centred on Ofsted's role in overseeing the rollout of the extended school day. That was your daily education news briefing.
Welcome back. So tonight we are solving crises. We've been left in charge of the school to look after it while our leaders are off elsewhere doing some important business off-site. And in the course of today, we've already been presented with 3 potential issues. The first one of these is academic. So you've just received an email from 20 disappointed Year 11 students who would like to study ancient history at A-level, but can't because the subject was discontinued last year following the departure of the teacher who had designed and run the course. Re-establishing the course would be uneconomical this year. The school down the road does still offer the subject at A-level. So what I'd be interested in hearing from you tonight is how you might initially deal with that essentially petition from students wishing to continue their studies of ancient history to A-level. The second task, a fairly straightforward one perhaps. Contractors, the head of PE comes to inform you that the the decorators who are repainting the entrance hall have propped open the code-locked fire doors for the 3rd time this week and left the building to get more paint. Paint trips typically take over an hour, so I'd be interested to hear how seriously you regard that issue. There's potentially a few issues at work there within that scenario, so please do send me a text or call in and talk about how we might overcome that potential challenge. The third one is academic. The head of sociology is unhappy because students keep telling him that they can't do his homework because it clashes with homework set by the psychology department. Homework timetable for tonight is sociology. The head of psychology has previously made clear his view that students don't do enough wider reading these days. So be interested to hear how you might resolve that one. Each of these 3 scenarios really are requiring us to manage 2 specific things. I'd like us to think about how we might deal with managing those two particular areas. The first of these is managing people, and often people are much, much more difficult to manage than resources. And the second one is managing those resources. So how do we approach the first one? The academic issue, I think, is that we've got to manage student disappointment, and we've got a caller coming in now. So I'm just going to bring them in.
Hi, Chris. Can you hear me?
Good evening, HB History. Can you hear me?
I can hear you loud and clear, Chris. It's Tom Hopkins Burke here. I just thought I'd call in for this first scenario, possibly, and then go back and then perhaps call in for another one, because it's a scenario which us ourselves in our school, we've had to deal with a very similar scenario to this. In that we have had a number of high achieving, high performing year 11s who were very, very keen for us to offer politics at A level, which we haven't done so far. We've offered it in previous years, but we haven't had an uptake. And we weren't going to offer it next year either. And the big fear was that we were going to lose these students to the college down the road. And it would have been uneconomical for us to have offered the politics course. And certainly there was no real appetite. And the solution which we came up with was very simple. And the solution was we decided to offer it.
And what did you do about the uneconomical side? Was it something you just said, well, we'll take the loss this year?
We had a quiet word with some of the students who were particularly keen not to lose the sixth form, and encouraged them to encourage their parents to, I mean, there's no other way of putting this really, to pester senior leadership in terms of, are you able to offer this course? Are you able to offer this course? We're in the position as well, but where we sort of were stuck between a rock and a hard place. We could either not offer this course and face losing some of our best year 11s, or offer the course, perhaps make that loss, but ultimately keep some of our best year 11s at the school. So I think the idea of it being uneconomical is fair enough, but ultimately it's about student retention. And in times of COVID, especially where students might be a little bit fed up of having been in this situation during COVID in the last 2 years and might be looking to seek pastures new, I think it's a difficult decision, but ultimately you've just got to keep those students on board, really. And that's the decision which we made.
That's particularly interesting to hear. Of course, if you were being landed with this situation on the day, I don't think you would wish to solve it on the day. How would you manage those student issues around disappointment on the day, do you think, Tom?
I think on the day, I think you've just got to be diplomatic, and it's not an easy one to get right, and I'm sure I would probably get it wrong. But you've just got to say, we have lots of difficult decisions every year around timetabling, and sometimes we can offer some courses and other times we can't offer this course, and unfortunately in this instance we're unable to offer this course. But look at all of the other amazing courses that we can offer as well at post 16, and here are some things which you might be particularly interested in.
Okay, so you might offer them a range of other options. What do you think might have been the consequence if you weren't in a position in your school to offer that subject?
We'd have lost the students.
Would it really have been as simple as that?
Pure and simple, we'd have lost the students. And the jubilation when we were able to say we are now in a position to offer this course, having done some considerable reworking of our timetable, the jubilation from some of the students who were affected by this was just, it was joyful to see, and it was, and it really helped us. It made it clear to us that we'd made the correct decision.
It's also an opportunity, perhaps, to suggest that student voice can actually have a real life impact in the school.
Yeah, definitely, because your scenario, we're talking about 20. Now, us, it wasn't quite 20, but it was still a not insignificant number. But I think if it were 2 students, perhaps, then you've got to be a bit more sort of diplomatic and say, unfortunately, we don't have the means to offer this course. But when you've got 20, I think that voice is much more powerful, and it's something which you've got to really, really sort of take into account.
I think you're right. There is a sense in which we want students to take responsibility for managing their study, and what better way of doing it than saying, well, actually, we really do want to do politics, or we really do want to do ancient history. Is there a way we can make it work?
I suppose the other issue in your scenarios, in our case in politics, we had myself and our head of history who were more than happy to put on the politics course and more than happy to put work in terms of creating schemes of work and learning the course and things like that. I suppose in your scenario where the teacher of your previous teacher of ancient history has left the school, is no longer in a position to teach it, you've got the added complication perhaps of who is actually going to teach this course.
That's a good point. It's a good point. Are you going to be recruiting when you weren't expecting to have to recruit?
I don't know. I don't know a great deal. I mean, I know timetabling is very difficult, and in terms of freeing up space, we've had to do this because we've had to find two A-level philosophy teachers out of nowhere, and we've managed to do that by taking a teacher of history and a teacher of English and getting them to do it, and rejigging the timetable, and that's for a 1-year thing. But in terms of ancient history, what I'd be doing is I'd be asking my history department, do any of you have sort of a specialism in ancient history or even medieval history, and would you be prepared to offer this course? Myself as a history teacher, as more of a modernist, or as sort of 19th century, 20th century historian, I was much more suited to be able to deliver a politics course. But you'd have to see whether you have the existing, not specialism, but the existing interest and the existing prior knowledge within your department to be able to determine whether or not actually you don't need to recruit because you've got people there.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, my school has just decided to offer psychology for the first time. And I think we're initially planning to go within the school for a psychology teacher, even though, as I say, we've never taught it before in the school. It'd be interesting to see how that unfolds over the next term or two.
That would be interesting. We've offered, as a school, we've offered psychology for many years, well before I turned up, and it's been our most popular A-level subject for a number of years, and we've just introduced it at GCSE as well, and it's heavily oversubscribed there by a factor of 3. What I would say is perhaps it depends what numbers look like when you're introducing a new subject. And if numbers are looking particularly high, it may just be worth investing that little bit extra, if the budget allows it, for a specialist to come in and spearhead the course, or if not, investing heavily in some subject-specific CPD for somebody who's taking over the course.
Yeah, it's an opportunity, isn't it, for somebody within the staff already to take on something new and exciting. That's in fact how our politics course developed in my school. We moved from having, we do have quite a large history department in my school, but the history staff are often employed in other departments too, or doing other tasks on site. And the politics department essentially was born out of the history department. So we had one member of staff take responsibility for politics, and it's been really successful. He's really engaged, passionate, innovative in the way he's organising the course, and the students absolutely love it. And it's that opportunity to look at some of the themes, I suppose, that you cover in history, but from a slightly different angle.
No, definitely, and I'm definitely looking forward to introducing politics next year as well for the first time, and it's certainly a challenge. When you have staff, I suppose, in your body who relish the challenge to do something a little bit different, just outside of their comfort zone, then I think it's an opportunity you've got to give them, to be honest, and it's one I'm looking forward to.
Perfect. So if we were to resolve scenario 1 then by deciding to offer the course with the support of staff within the school and the students, then that would probably put us in a winning position here. We just have to think carefully about how we budget for the forthcoming years, perhaps.
And whether it creates any shortages in other subjects as well.
That's worth considering, isn't it? And whenever you take staff from departments, you're potentially depleting other departments. So that's an important one. Out of interest, Tom, how high do you think that ranked on those 3 scenarios for the first half of the day?
I think it would have ranked second. out of a 3. I'd have put scenario 2 ahead of it and scenario 3 below it.
And what's the solution? What do you think you might do for scenario 2?
You'll have to read it again to me, Chris.
So the head of PE has come to inform you that the decorators who are repainting the entrance hall have propped open the code-locked fire doors for the 3rd time this week and left the building to get more paint. Their paint trips typically take over an hour.
That's probably a little bit that's a bit too far outside of my zone of proximal development, whatever it is. To be honest, Chris, I'd like to bail and leave that to another caller. I can see, I imagine Tom Rogers is still in. I don't know if Khalil's still in. I know Fiona's just joined in as well. So perhaps I might phone a friend on that one, if that's okay.
It's perfectly fine, Tom. Thanks for calling in.
No problem, Chris.
Thank you. Bye-bye. So we've heard from Tom there, who suggests that the solution to our academic scenario 1 is to make the course happen somehow. If we can find the staff resource and we can find the economic resource to make it happen, then we potentially got a solution that satisfies those people who we are here to serve, which is the student body. The second one then, the contractors one, is one that I've had to deal with from time to time, working on a large site where we have lots of contractors coming and going for most of the day, most of the week. The head of PE comes to inform you that the decorators who are repainting the entrance hall have propped open the code-locked fire doors for the 3rd time this week and left the building to get more paint. Their paint trips typically take over an hour. Well, I've had some experience of managing these kinds of situations, but I'd be interested in hearing if anyone would like to call in like Tom has and give us the benefit of their wisdom and experience. Have you had to deal with contractors who are perhaps less than, how should we say, less than rule book following when it comes to their engagement with the school premises? Interested to hear what you think about this one. To me, this is quite a big issue, potentially on a number of levels. One, we've got the security issue of essentially leaving the door to the main building open and potentially unsupervised unless we've got CCTV in our school. That's another matter we could discuss at length. Perhaps overlooking the door, we've got the issue of potentially anybody walking in off the street, so we might have to consider that one as a potential safety risk. We've got the fact, of course, that these are fire doors that are supposed to be remaining closed just in case a fire should occur. So we've got the issue of fire safety here potentially to manage. We've got the issue of how we manage our contractors on site and get them to follow the health and safety policy, because I would imagine our health and safety policy on our school policy book would probably suggest that this kind of event shouldn't be happening. And then I suppose there's the issue of how long they're away from their work, leaving the task and the materials unsupervised. So potentially quite a few issues there. I think we'd need to raise them with our health and safety officer. I think in the first instance, we would want to make sure those doors were locked and operational as soon as possible. And then I think we would have a word with the contractors ourselves, perhaps, if they were to return, before we spoke to our health and safety officer. But it may well be the role of the health and safety officer to take that up. But I think a potentially small issue that could become quite a serious issue if you were unfortunate enough to have some kind of spontaneous combustion moment while you were on site. So please do send in your messages or call in how you would resolve issue 2. This is, of course, something that's happened more than once, happened 3 times. It'd be interesting to know whether each of these 3 occasions were followed up with some kind of message to the contractors or discussion with them. Please do drop your messages into the chat and let us know how you'd manage it. The third one, I think, is perhaps probably familiar to most people in schools, a kind of head-to-head between academic departments. The third issue is the head of sociology is unhappy because students keep telling him that they can't do his homework because it clashes with homework set by the psychology department. The homework timetable for tonight is sociology. The head of psychology has previously made clear his view that students don't do enough wider reading these days. So this problem, perhaps on the face of it, is a problem to do with academic ethos in the school. But actually, I think it's more widely something about collegiality within the school. Without going too far into the specifics here, we might want to ask ourselves the question as to what extent the psychology department are helping the rest of the school, or whether they're ploughing a lone furrow that is also perhaps disregarding the policy positions that we have as a school. HB History says, is this post 16? I think this is post 16, yeah. So we've got in our school all of the year groups from year 7 all the way through to year 13. So this is a post 16 issue potentially. Why are we timetabling homework is the question that we might ask. It ought to be set as and when needed. Sorry, students, worth making that point. In some schools, of course, I'm thinking here, particularly in my own context of a boarding environment, we do have to timetable when our students complete their non-classroom schoolwork, because it needs to be fitted into the rest of their school day, which will include things significantly beyond their class. Salty says, look at crossover reading. Yep, so potentially there may be an issue here around wider reading and how we get departments to work together, perhaps to reduce the amount of clashes we have between departments. But yeah, there's certainly an issue there to be explored in terms of wider reading. Do the head of sociology and the head of psychology get on? Is this perhaps, as we've seen in previous episodes, a case where personalities are getting in the way of practice? I mean, I think most schools have rival departments within their faculties, but I wonder sometimes if perhaps that rivalry is overblown. Perhaps there's more in terms of collaborative work that these departments could do. Homework for tonight, though, is definitely sociology. So our head of sociology should perhaps be assured that his work will be getting done tonight. He's obviously quite annoyed, so we'd want to have a conversation with our head of sociology, find out how often this has been happening, find out perhaps what he thinks the solution might be. Perhaps it might be a case of having a conversation with the head of psychology and the head of sociology together in the same room, if such a thing is possible. Perhaps we might agree a way forward. I think you'd want to leave it fairly late until you point out that the timetable needs to be followed, come what may. I wonder if we have any sympathy too for this idea that further reading should be something that is possible for students even within a fairly constricted timetable. HB History says our heads of psychology and sociology teach criminology together too, so I hope they get on. So again, perhaps there's a solution here where these two heads of the department work together quite well. I did pick sociology and psychology for the reason that I thought they were perhaps closer in mindset, possibly, than maybe a physics department and an English department. But it'd be interesting to see what your views are. Is this the kind of clash that happens very often in your school? And if it does, how do you find a way around that problem? Is it something that goes up as far as your academic deputy head? Is it something that is resolved within your department or head of department meetings? Is it something that you resolve on a kind of informal basis in the staff room, perhaps over a tea and a biscuit, while you're talking about all the other things that are going on within the school? Complex says, lol, there's an irony about a sociologist not getting on with others. Possibly so, possibly so. HB History says a lot of student overlap. A lot of the time it's clashes between two history teachers teaching different parts of the course. Yes, that's something we've certainly seen over the course of our timetable shifts in the last 5-6 years. The pressure that's put on the time that students have available to do their schoolwork, or the time that students claim they have available to do the schoolwork, does mean that you sometimes even have competition for that study time within departments as well as between departments. Indeed. One wonders if there is a lot of student overlap, if we have students who are doing both psychology and sociology. There might be something to be done in terms of helping students manage their time more effectively themselves. Perhaps the issue is arising as a consequence of students being less capable in their time management skills than we might wish them to be. So the solutions here are perhaps to go down the line of talking to the students, talking to the staff independently in the first instance to find out whether this scenario is as it appears to be on the surface. And then if there really is an issue that can't be resolved through the informal discussion of making sure that we each allow time for other departments to get their students through the syllabus in a timely fashion, then we perhaps go back to policy. But I think policy is the second or third step on the road. I don't think it would be the first step here. HB History says, my favourite excuse for a lack of homework was that the student was busy baking banana bread. That's an interesting one, HB. My favourite excuse for not doing homework over a half-term holiday just before the Easter holiday was the student was out lambing in the fields for the entire holiday, so didn't have time to write their essay on the poetry of William Blake. They were too busy dealing with actual lambs to be focused on poetic ones. So, yeah, there's a sense that students could potentially be using this to make excuses. So we do have to be wary of that. In terms of our three scenarios for the morning, though, I think the priority in which we resolve them, if we do resolve them on the day, is certainly priority 2. So the contractors is certainly a health and safety and a safeguarding issue, potentially a fire safety issue, potentially a health and safety regulations issue if things don't go your way. So I would put that certainly at the top of the list of my things to manage this morning, either by speaking to the contractors directly as the sole representative of the leadership team on site, or making an appointment to speak to the management of the contractors as soon as practically possible. We do need to make sure that our schools are safe and secure. That's our primary responsibility as teachers, according to the teacher standards. The one I'd probably manage next would be the email from the Year 11 students. I think I'd gather a number of them together and have a meeting with them in which we suggest potential ways forward. It might be the case that we can offer the course and find some way of staffing it from within the school. It might be that we're able to offer the course and staff it from outside the school, but getting it set up at this time of year might be tricky because we might need to make sure we appoint staff who are capable of performing the task of running the course unaided. It could also be that unfortunately we have to say no in this case, and that we shepherd students to alternative subjects that may interest them. But I think there has to be a conversation here between you and these students just to settle the waters, I think, and to calm things down. And then thirdly, for our morning session, managing this trade-off between sociology and psychology is important, but it's perhaps something that has been rumbling away in the background for some time before today, and it's something that we may wish to address later on in the course of our week, possibly not immediately. If our academic deputy head is back in tomorrow, then it's one we would refer to him, I think. And if there's anything further that needs to be done, I think we would leave it to him or her to manage that particular issue, but certainly raise it on his or her radar. Brilliant. So that's the morning. So we've managed to get through the morning so far without too much difficulty. We've had one caller already. Thomas has called in to talk us through what he sees as the solution to scenario 1 and to give us his ranking of the other 2 scenarios. And we've got a busy afternoon ahead. We've got some strange scenarios coming up in the second half of the show, so I'd be delighted to hear from you either by text or calling in to help me manage these. I don't have the answers to all of these myself, I have to say. Some of these are quite strange. Some of them are based on scenarios that I have either heard arise in other schools or have built out of schools scenarios that have arisen in other schools. So I've kind of beefed them up a bit. But we're going to go to the news now. And then in the second half of the show, we will deal with scenarios 4 to 7. So don't go away. We're going to the news and we'll be straight back.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News with Megan Goods.
This is your latest Teachers Talk Radio News. New research from the London School of Economics has shown that children born in the summer are being mislabeled as having special educational needs by their primary schools. Using census records for over 6 million children who were in state primary schools over the years 2008 to 2018, Dr. Tammy Campbell found that among children reaching Year 6 in 2018, 16% of autumn-born girls had been attributed SEND support at some point during primary school, compared to 26% of summer-born girls. Similarly, 28% of autumn-born boys were given support, compared to 40% of those born in the summer. Dr. Campbell stated that the study shows how rigid prescriptive expectations not suitable for relatively younger children result in many of these children being denoted with SEND. And then the system that has created these needs cannot or will not meet them. This is because inherently, by the same conditions through which it creates some SEND, it is configured not to serve the children it attributes. It is configured instead to denote children as sufficient, good, meeting standards, expected level, or deficient, not good, not meeting standards, not at the expected level. This, the evidence begins to suggest, may contribute to increasing numbers of children being forced from the mainstream system. Teachers and schools are spending increasing portions of time serving the needs of the centralized assessment and accountability system, delineating children according to its dictates, rather than working with individuals to ensure learning, progress, and inclusion. Teaching unions have criticised the government's plan to extend the school day, saying it could do more harm than good. The plan has been drawn up by Sir Kevin Collins, the government's Education Recovery Commissioner, and proposes a minimum 35-hour week and 100 hours of additional schooling. However, opposition from the Treasury could see the plan receive 10 times less funding than originally proposed, meaning the implementation of the proposal could fall short. Education spokespeople have been critical of the plan so far, with concerns over the impact on staff well-being and students feeling they are being punished for circumstances beyond their control. Criticism also centred on Ofsted's role in overseeing the rollout of the extended school day. That was your daily education news briefing.
Introducing Amanda Davey, Amanda is one of the first specialist teacher assessors for dyscalculia in the UK and offers dyscalculia tutoring and bespoke training for schools. With 26 years of teaching and tutoring experience in the UK, Amanda offers specialist online tuition focused on building confidence and developing skills. Amanda also offers online and face-to-face training on dyscalculia for educators, informing practitioners as to how to identify children that may have dyscalculia and how to support them in class. Find out more about Amanda and what she can offer you at www.amanda-davy-dyscalculia.co.uk.
Okay, welcome back. So we're into part 2 of our crisis management scenarios. So for those listeners who've just joined us in the last few minutes, we're in the process of solving a series of crises that have arisen in our school on the day that we've been left in charge. So we've dealt with 3 scenarios already, 2 academic ones and 1 safety or health and safety issue, and we've got a few more unpredictable scenarios arising now. So here is our 4th scenario, and I've labeled this community because, of course, as a school, we have a responsibility to our wider community of our parents and our former students. And here is our 4th scenario. So a performance of the Year 13 Leavers play, a modern version of Antigone, is due to take place at 6 p.m. The female lead and understudy for the part of Antigone have gone down with a stomach complaint over lunch and are not fit to perform. Mrs. Sully, the head of drama, knows the part inside out, but hasn't performed on stage in over 10 years. So what do we do about this one? Potentially puts us in a really difficult position here. We're approaching the point at which our Year 11 and Year 13 students are going to be leaving the school. Here we have the Year 13 Leavers play, can't be moved to any other date, has to happen tonight. Students have been rehearsing for this performance for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks. We've got parents coming in from all over the country to witness their children taking part in this play. We've got some significant characters in this play. It's an ancient Greek play. We've got Creon, the kind of inflexible leader who passes laws that his people are reluctant to follow but do so out of fear. And we've got a number of other supporting characters too in the background. So we've got HB History is called in. Hello, Tom. How do we solve this one?
Well, I was just thinking, again, it sounds like a scenario with which I've been, which I've had to deal with in the past, which is that once upon a time, I played in an orchestra and we had a semi-famous international performer, soloist, scheduled to come in and play Tchaikovsky's Violin Concerto in D major. And on the day he was due to fly in, the day before the concert, he missed his flight and he couldn't get another one. And so we had the great difficulty of trying to find a soloist the day before the concert to play what is a technically tricky symphony concerto. So yeah, it's something which we've had to deal with. And the answer really is doing a lot of calling around and just trying to see if there's anybody you can find it. You then have the added complications of safeguarding and GDPR and other concerns which you find particularly in the school scenario, which you didn't back in the glory days perhaps of 2015. So yes, I mean, the answer is you can't cancel the performance. I don't think you can cancel the performance because this is what they've been building towards. It's their Leavers play, it's their legacy. So you've just got to find somebody to do it.
I think you have. What's your view of getting Mrs. Sully, our head of drama, to perform the part? She's the one that knows the leading part inside out and back to front. She's been rehearsing the students for the last few weeks.
Why not? Why not? Are you producing a program for this performance, or is the audience just turning up?
I think we're producing a program for the performance. It's going to be
Fantastic.
recorded as well as all of the best
Well,
performances.
slip in a little piece of paper, which is what we did, to say, stop press. Unfortunately, such and such is unable to perform tonight due to illness. We have such, Mrs. Sully in this case is standing in, and that sort of, and then a nice little complimentary message in there about Mrs. Sully as well, and that kind of that goes a step towards solving the problem, I feel.
Fantastic. Mal CPD says, do it. Get on stage and show them your talent. Seems to be the route we're taking. Of course, I suppose there's something a little bit different, isn't there, when you're dealing with live drama as opposed to music, because we would expect our musicians to be sitting with their score in front of them, but not expecting our performers to be reading from their script on stage. So I don't think we could immediately land a student in the role at the last moment. I don't think that would work.
No, unless you've got a student who's been James Clark, who hosted this morning on the breakfast show, was saying on Twitter, most people know most people's lines inside out by the time you get to the final performance. But if you've got somebody who definitely does know the lines, I don't think you can just take the risk and sort of go with somebody who might be 60% confident. Of course, has anybody asked Mrs. Sully whether or not she wants to do this?
It's a good question. I think we probably ought to ask her.
I don't think she can turn up at 6 o'clock to get everybody ready for the performance and say, "Oh, sorry, we've got one slight problem. We don't have a performer. Why don't you do it?"
Knowing Mrs. Sully, she's going to be there from 10 a.m. in the morning, making sure that all of the stage management props are sorted, isn't she?
Well, no, she's probably the one making the decision, to be honest, not us.
I think you're right. The decision goes here to the head of department. She'll be presumably your theatre manager as well as your head of drama. Mal CPD says, I think she's been waiting for this moment for the last decade. Possibly so. I have seen staff step into this kind of very position, actually. And again, it's a drama related theme and a different play, but a Greek play, and much shorter, a kind of half an hour thing rather than something that might run for 2 hours in a bridge form on stage.
Good question there from Complex, whether or not this is a role which could be sight read, and I suppose the answer to that is how much time is spent on stage and how long particular scenes are.
Yeah, possibly so. I don't know how easy that is to do. I mean, I failed my debut audition for a part in Samuel Beckett's Waiting for Godot. But if I had been put in it, it would have been totally absurd. So I don't really know. Really, my acting experience doesn't go that far, to be honest. So we think we might have a solution in our head of drama. Would we perhaps want to follow up why 2 students have gone down with a stomach complaint over lunch?
I think we might need to get the lateral flow tests out.
We might need to do something. We might find out.
There's a real danger, perhaps, of it spreading to the rest of the cast.
Well, that's the other thing I was worried about. I wonder whether some of these students have been rehearsing in the course of the day before the performance, perhaps off timetable, and they may well have been in contact with these 2 members of the cast who'd been taken sick. So that may be something we need to be sure of before we run with the show. I think the show will go on, provided everybody is healthy in the cast to perform it.
But what if we have another person go off and have to call in sick? How many actors do we have to lose until we decide we're going to have to do it another day?
Well, I think we're keeping our fingers crossed on this one, aren't we? It's one of these traditional end of year things that you can't really postpone.
No, we could also go and see whether or not they're hiding in the wooden horse.
We could do. We might find out about that later on. In terms of how your students are responding to the end of the year, Tom, have you had to postpone or move significant leaving events in your school?
Everything's gone ahead as scheduled. We've seen we said goodbye to year 11 and year 13 at the end of this half term. Year 13 have had their leavers assembly and they've now departed with career support in place where required. And year 11, we've said goodbye to them from formal lessons. A number of them will be back in transition activities in the next 3 weeks after half term. And they have their official leavers assembly at the end of the month as well, when they all come back, or as many of them as possible come back. So everything's gone to plan so far. Fortunately, relative to other schools, I don't think we've been hit quite as hard as by COVID. We've had cases and we've had to isolate bubbles, but not as much as I think other schools.
Yeah, we've had a couple of problems with many of our leavers events, particularly for year 13. Because we're an international school, so we recruit from all over the world, we've had to move our leavers ball essentially and dinner to the start of next year, because if our students were to leave and go back to some of the quarantine countries, they wouldn't be able to return for the events. So that's been quite tricky to manage. In fact, I'm looking after our yearbook as well, our year 13 yearbook this year, and it's unlikely that we're going to have the opportunity to give it to students before they leave for the holiday. And it's also unlikely that we'll be able to have any significant big group photographs in the way that we ordinarily would. So getting the students' yearbook committee together to thinking about how we make the best of the circumstances we're in is quite a challenge, actually.
Unless that's coming up tonight, so I think that's a scenario for another week.
I think it may well be. We're about to hear from the horse, actually. So here is our fifth scenario. It's the weird one. So the head of your rival school emails you. Someone has put a photo on social media of 3 students wearing your
No, I can't hear you, Chris. I don't know, Tom, whether or not you can hear me. Okay, Tom, you can hear me. No, Chris, we can't hear you. I don't know, Tom, whether you want to call in or whether Mal wants to call in or Ella or Seema wants to call in. We can discuss this as well, or whether Chris just wants to. I mean, it'd be a real shame if we had to call it off, I think, because I think we've got 2 really top scenarios to discuss, but maybe that'll be for another day. Yeah, Chris says his microphone's just stopped. Yeah, I think wrap it up and for another day. I'll hang up.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News with Megan Goods.
This is your latest Teachers Talk Radio News. New research from the London School of Economics has shown that children born in the summer are being mislabelled as having special educational needs by their primary schools. Using census records for over 6 million children who were in state primary schools over the years 2008 to 2018, Dr. Tammy Campbell found that among children reaching Year 6 in 2018, 16% of autumn-born girls had been attributed SEND support at some point during primary school, compared to 26% of summer-born girls. Similarly, 28% of autumn-born boys were given support, compared to 40% of those born in the summer. Dr. Campbell stated that the study shows how rigid prescriptive expectations not suitable for relatively younger children result in many of these children being denoted with SEND. And then the system that has created these needs cannot or will not meet them. This is because inherently, by the same conditions through which it creates some SEND, it is configured not to serve the children it attributes. It is configured instead to denote children as sufficient, good, meeting standards, expected level, or deficient, not good, not meeting standards, not at the expected level. This, the evidence begins to suggest, may contribute to increasing numbers of children being forced from the mainstream system. Teachers and schools are spending increasing portions of time serving the needs of the centralised assessment and accountability system, delineating children according to its dictates, rather than working with individuals to ensure learning, progress and inclusion. Teaching unions have criticised the government's plan to extend the school day, saying it could do more harm than good. The plan has been drawn up by Sir Kevin Collins, the government's Education Recovery Commissioner, and proposes a minimum 35-hour week and 100 hours of additional schooling. However, opposition from the Treasury could see the plan receive 10 times less funding than originally proposed, meaning the implementation of the proposal could fall short. Education spokespeople have been critical of the plan so far, with concerns over the impact on staff well-being and students feeling they are being punished for circumstances beyond their control. Criticism also centred on Ofsted's role in overseeing the rollout of the extended school day. That was your daily education news briefing.